It was a cool spring morning on April 3, 1986, in the small, tight-knit town of Red Hollow, nestled deep in the mountains of Oregon. The birds were chirping, the air crisp with the scent of blooming pine, and the community was just beginning to stir awake. Lena Carver, a quiet yet intelligent 16-year-old girl, stepped out of her front door just after 7 a.m., wearing her usual blue denim jacket and carrying a burgundy backpack. Her father, Martin Carver, watched from the porch with a mug of coffee in hand, giving her a wave and reminding her not to forget her science project. She smiled and rolled her eyes playfully, disappearing down the sidewalk toward school, a route she had walked hundreds of times before. That was the last time anyone saw her. By noon, Lena had failed to show up to her second period class. Her best friend, Emily Travers, told the school counselor that she assumed Lena was just sick. But when the school called home and Martin rushed to check her room, the bed was made, nothing was missing, and her shoes except for the pair she wore that morning were all neatly lined up. Her lunch was still on the counter. Martin immediately drove her route, stopping neighbors, checking the schoolyard, gas stations, bus stops, nothing. Panic began to set in like a storm cloud rolling over Red Hollow. Something was wrong. Deeply wrong. By evening, the local police had issued a missing person bulletin, and volunteers from all over town combed the woods, streets, and surrounding areas with flashlights and dogs. The only sign of Lena ever being on the road that day was her backpack, found propped gently against the base of an old pine tree, 2 blocks from the Carver's home. Inside it were her textbooks, a note to Emily about an upcoming math test, and a half-eaten granola bar. There were no signs of a struggle, no drag marks, no footprints leading away from the site. It was as if she had simply evaporated into thin air. Martin couldn't sleep. He spent every night for weeks sitting in Lena's room, hoping she'd walk through the door. He retraced every second of that morning. Her light laugh, the way her braids swung over her shoulder, her chipped pink nail polish. The town began whispering rumors. Some thought she had run away with a boy. Others said she was tired of small-town life. But Martin knew better. Lena had never shown signs of rebellion. She had no boyfriend. She had a bright future and was planning a trip to visit colleges that summer. Her disappearance made no sense, and that terrified him more than anything else. As weeks turned into months, the investigation stalled. No ransom notes were delivered. No bodies were found. Her case made headlines across Oregon for a short while, even gaining brief national attention. But like most cold cases, it slowly faded from public view. The police offered a $10,000 reward. Martin printed missing posters every week and pinned them himself on every bulletin board he could find. Still, Red Hollow moved on. Seasons changed, and Lena's bedroom remained untouched. It was only the beginning of a mystery that would haunt the town and Martin for the next 2 decades. By early 1987, nearly a year had passed since Lena's disappearance. And despite Martin Carver's tireless efforts, the trail had grown cold. The once vibrant search parties had dwindled to a few determined locals and an exhausted father who refused to stop believing. Police had followed every imaginable lead. Hitchhikers spotted on highways, anonymous tips about a girl seen at a truck stop, even a psychic's bizarre vision of Lena living in a cabin by the river. But each lead ended the same way: nowhere. The file on Lena Carver became thicker with dead ends, false hopes, and silent witnesses. Martin's life was now measured in 2 parts: before Lena vanished, and after. He stopped going to work, and his relationships with friends and neighbors became strained. People in Red Hollow started avoiding eye contact, unsure of what to say to the man who was slowly unraveling in front of them. His wife, Diane, once strong and composed, began spending more time in bed. Her health deteriorated. She stopped cooking. She stopped smiling. The grief was eroding them from the inside out, quietly, relentlessly. The home that once echoed with Lena's laughter had become a mausoleum of silence and fading memories. 3 years after Lena went missing, in 1989, a new detective was assigned to the case. Detective Harold Winslow, known for his skepticism and by-the-book methods, reviewed the entire file and held a single press conference. In it, he floated the possibility that Lena had run away voluntarily, suggesting that perhaps she had been unhappy at home. The Carvers were devastated. No evidence supported that theory. Lena left behind her wallet, her savings, and her diary pages filled with hope and plans, not dread. But the detective's public statement changed everything. Funding dried up. Media attention vanished. The case file was quietly archived. Over the years, Martin refused to let go. He submitted Lena's DNA and dental records to every missing person database in the country. He contacted investigative journalists. He traveled 2 conventions on unsolved disappearances, clutching her photo like a relic. But every door closed in his face. In 1997, tragedy struck again. Lena Carver passed away from a sudden stroke. Some said it was grief that killed her. Martin barely spoke at the funeral. All he said, as he placed a white rose on her casket, was, "I promised her I'd find our daughter and I will." By 2006, Lena's name had become little more than a ghost story in Red Hollow. Teenagers whispered about her at sleepovers, and older townsfolk shook their heads in pity when passing Martin on the street. He was now an old man with tired eyes and a weathered coat, often seen taping new flyers to street poles that had long since stopped attracting attention. The world had forgotten Lena Carver. But Martin never did. He couldn't, because deep down, beneath the fatigue and heartbreak, he felt something no one else could explain, that she was still out there, waiting to be found. It was a gray, drizzling afternoon in the fall of 2006. The kind of day that soaked into your bones and seemed to blur time itself. Martin Carver was now in his early 60s, thinner, quieter, and worn down by 2 decades of unanswered questions. That day, he found himself driving aimlessly through the back roads outside Red Hollow, following no particular route. Some days, when the weight became too much to bear, he just drove. It gave him a strange comfort. He passed forgotten barns, crumbling gas stations, and stretches of pine forest that looked exactly the same as they had in 1986. Nothing ever changed out there except him. He pulled into a small town he barely recognized, Glendale, a fading dot on the map about 40 miles from home. He parked beside a rundown antique store called Timeless Junk, a dusty shack with peeling paint and fogged windows covered in handwritten signs. VHS, vinyls, oddities, estate items, everything has a story. Martin wasn't planning on stopping, but something made him turn the ignition off and step inside. The air inside the shop smelled like old newspapers and mold. Floorboards creaked underfoot. Items were stacked haphazardly: typewriters, dolls with missing eyes, boxes of keys, records from the 1940s. It was chaos, but oddly peaceful. In the far corner, near a wobbly wooden shelf lined with VHS tapes, something caught Martin's attention: a plain black tape, cracked at the edges, with no label, no markings at all. It sat slightly askew from the rest, as if recently placed. He picked it up and felt a chill crawl across his skin. The store owner, a gaunt man in his 70s, didn't even look up from his newspaper when Martin asked how much it was. $1, he mumbled. Most of those tapes are old garbage. People don't want them anymore. Martin hesitated for a moment, then handed over the $1. He had no idea why he felt compelled to take that tape home, only that he had to. Back at his house, Martin dusted off an old VCR, one of the few electronics he'd never thrown away. With trembling hands, he pushed the tape in and hit play. For a few seconds, only static filled the screen. He leaned back, disappointed, ready to eject it when the static faded. Slowly, an image emerged: a dim room, a bare mattress on the floor, and a young girl sitting cross-legged in front of the camera. Her hair was tangled, her face thinner, but her eyes were unmistakable. Martin's heart stopped. It was Lena. She was staring straight into the lens. The time stamp in the corner read March 11, 1987, almost a full year after her disappearance. Her voice trembled but was clear. "If you're watching this, that means you found me. But I may not be here anymore. He doesn't let us leave. We're underground. I don't know where. But listen closely." And then, without warning, the screen turned to static again. No further audio. No visual clues. Just that one haunting message: Lena's face, her voice, and the word underground, echoing in Martin's mind like a scream from the past. Martin must have replayed the tape over 100 times that night. He barely blinked, scribbling notes and pausing every few frames to catch the smallest detail. The quality was terrible, grainy and damaged, but Lena's face, though pale and tired, was burned into the screen like a ghost reaching out through static. Her message was short, disjointed, and terrifying. "We're underground." That phrase alone rattled Martin to his core. It wasn't just a metaphor. The way she said it, cold, certain, mechanical, suggested something very real. But what place could she have meant? A bunker? A basement? A compound? The footage had a haunting silence to it: no background music, no ambient sound except for a barely audible hum, like a generator running in the distance. Martin turned the volume all the way up and heard what sounded like footsteps. slow and heavy, just beyond the room Lena sat in. Her eyes flicked nervously toward the camera at one point, and then toward the door, as if someone was watching her film this secretly. He noticed her whispering her words instead of speaking aloud. This wasn't a casual recording, it was a cry for help, delivered under constant threat. In the background, Martin spotted subtle details he had missed at first. On the wall behind Lena, there was a calendar, faded and worn, with red X's scratched over random dates in no clear order. On the floor next to her was a metal bowl, possibly used for food, and behind her, barely visible in the corner, was something strange, a shadow, moving quickly, too fast to clearly identify. Martin paused and rewound several times, trying to make sense of it. It wasn't her shadow. It was something or someone else, moving inside the room right before the tape cut to static. Then he spotted a detail that made his breath catch in his throat. On the far edge of the video frame, briefly in view, was a pillow with a logo on it, a tree with the words Maple Creek Lodge embroidered underneath. Martin's heart pounded. Maple Creek Lodge had been an old retreat about 30 miles from Red Hollow, a once popular mountain getaway that had been shut down in the late 1980s. He remembered rumors back then about underground rooms, employees disappearing, and strange things found in the crawlspaces. At the time, most chalked it up to urban legend. Now, Martin wasn't so sure. He dug through old newspapers and town records until sunrise, uncovering something disturbing. The lodge had been raided by health inspectors in 1988, shortly after Lena's disappearance, due to code violations and alleged reports of illegal confinement. Nothing was ever proven, and the building was boarded up shortly after. But what if Lena had been taken there? What if her message was recorded from beneath that very lodge? Martin's hands trembled as he realized something chilling. She may have left the tape on purpose for him to find. 20 years later. Somehow, she knew. As dawn broke through the foggy glass of his living room window, Martin sat surrounded by old notebooks, a hot pot of black coffee, and the VHS tape that had consumed his every thought. He wasn't just watching it anymore, he was analyzing it like it was a map, a puzzle his daughter had created 2 decades ago in hopes someone might one day solve it. He played the tape again, this time frame by frame. Every flicker, every sound, every object in the dimly lit room mattered now. And slowly, he began to find clues hidden in plain sight, details others might have missed. But that meant everything to him. The calendar on the wall, which at first had seemed random, now took on chilling significance. Martin noticed that the red X's weren't just over dates, they were drawn in such a way that they connected into a jagged shape, like a crude map or symbol. He compared it to old floor plans of the Maple Creek Lodge he had found in the town archives. To his shock, the X's roughly matched the layout of the lodge's lower levels, a place never open to the public. It wasn't a calendar at all. It was a coded message, a desperate attempt by Lena to indicate her location inside the building. Next, he isolated the muffled sound that echoed beneath Lena's whispered message, the one he had thought might be footsteps. Using audio software a local university student helped him with, Martin filtered the layers of noise. What emerged was far more disturbing than footsteps. It was a metallic scraping, rhythmic and slow. Possibly a large door opening. Or a gate. But it wasn't the sound itself that chilled Martin, it was the moment. Lena paused mid-sentence. Right as the sound occurred, her face tensing in fear. She didn't need to say what it meant. Whoever held her captive was right outside that door. Watching, waiting. Then there was the logo on the pillow. Maple Creek Lodge's old emblem, which had changed in later years. That small detail told Martin something crucial. The video had been filmed before the lodge closed, meaning Lena may have been alive during the initial investigation. Possibly even while police searched nearby. And if she was held underground, as she said, then she had been just feet away from help, but hidden behind walls no one had thought to break down. That thought tormented Martin. They had been so close. He had been so close. And yet, she had remained invisible to the world. One final detail disturbed Martin more than anything else. As the camera zoomed in slightly, perhaps, as Lena reached toward it, her fingers brushed the lens. And for a brief second, a reflection appeared. It wasn't clear, but it was there. A figure, tall, standing in the background, unmoving, just ... watching. The moment lasted less than a second before the tape cut to static. Martin paused the frame and printed a still image. He taped it to his wall and circled the shape. This wasn't just a man. He was wearing something on his head. A mask, a hood. The features were obscured. But the presence was undeniable. And whoever he wasn't just Lena's captor, he had been with her in that room, with the evidence stacking up and a renewed fire burning in his chest. Martin Carver marched into the Red Hollow Police Department holding the VHS tape, printed photos of the still frames, and a compiled folder of research. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like a desperate father chasing ghosts, he felt like a man carrying proof. At first, the desk sergeant didn't take him seriously. But when Martin uttered the words Maple Creek Lodge and showed the distorted image of Lena whispering to the camera, a silence fell over the room. Within hours, the footage had been escalated to the county investigators. Something had changed. People were finally listening. A week later, after an emergency request and historical property review, a small task force was assembled. It wasn't a massive operation, just 3 officers, a forensic specialist, and a local fire and rescue crew, but it was more than Martin had hoped for. Together, they made their way up the forgotten trail that led to Maple Creek Lodge. Now little more than a decaying shell of its former self, vines choked the siding. Windows had long been broken out. The front door was barely hanging on by rusted hinges. The air was thick with mold and damp pine. Most locals never went near it anymore. It was the kind of place where you felt watched on inside. The floors groaned under their boots as they stepped carefully through the wreckage. Broken furniture, old guest books, cracked photo frames, and dead insects blanketed the ground. Martin led them toward the basement access, hidden behind a collapsed shelf in what had once been the manager's office. It took nearly an hour to move enough debris to reach the rusted trapdoor beneath. When they pried it open, the stench that escaped was nauseating stale air, mold, and something else no one could quite describe. They descended the narrow stairs with flashlights, sweeping the underground with beams of light and radios crackling with static. What they found was worse than anyone expected. There were 2 rooms beneath the lodge, sealed off from one another. The first was empty, except for old mattresses, stained sheets, and metal chains bolted into the concrete floor. On one of the walls, scratched in what appeared to be dried blood or rust, was a name: Lena. The room was cold and silent, but the horror was overwhelming. In the second room, hidden behind a false wooden wall that the search team nearly missed, they discovered something even more haunting: personal items, a hairbrush, a worn sweater, a bracelet Martin immediately recognized. He had given it to Lena for her 13th birthday. There was no doubt she had been there. But she wasn't anymore. There was no sign of a body. No remains. No footprints. Just a silence so thick it pressed on their lungs. DNA tests later confirmed that the items in the room, especially the bracelet, belonged to Lena Carver. The lodge, now deemed a crime scene, was sealed off once more. Media began circling the story like vultures, and people who had forgotten Lena's name were suddenly interested again. But none of that mattered to Martin. He stood outside the lodge, staring at the structure as dusk fell, whispering the same words he'd said every day for 20 years. "I'm still coming for you, Lena." Only now, he had a new question clawing at the back of his mind: what if she had never really left? Just when Martin thought the trail had gone cold again, something happened that defied logic. Roughly 3 weeks after the search at Maple Creek Lodge, Martin returned home late one evening after meeting with a private investigator. As he approached his porch, something caught his eye: a small cardboard box, slightly wet from the evening dew, sealed with black electrical tape. There was no return address, no postage marks, no label. It hadn't come through any postal service. Someone had personally delivered it. His blood turned cold as he picked it up and turned it in his hands. He already knew what it contained. Before opening it, inside was another VHS tape, this time with a sticky note attached. It simply read, "Play this alone." Martin rushed inside, locked the door behind him, and popped the tape into the VCR. Static filled the screen again, just like the first time. But then the image came into focus. It was her, Lena, but older, at least 10 years older than the girl in the first tape. Her hair was longer, darker, her cheeks more sunken, and her eyes. They had changed. There was no innocence left. She looked directly into the camera, and in a low whisper, she said, "If you're watching this, I got out. But I don't know how long I'll stay free." The camera angle was different this time, angled slightly from above, possibly mounted. Lena sat in what looked like a motel room, curtain drawn tightly behind her, a cracked lamp flickering beside her. She continued, "He still watches me. I don't know how, but he always finds me. Don't try to follow me, Dad. You'll only disappear too." Her voice cracked on that last word. Martin leaned in closer as she lifted a small piece of paper toward the camera. Written in shaky handwriting were the words, Red Hollow Junk Shop. That was where Martin had found the first tape. A thought chilled him. She had planted that tape. For him. On purpose. 20 years later. How? Before the video ended, there was a brief, jarring shift. The camera cut to black, then flickered again just enough for Martin to glimpse a flash of movement behind Lena. A silhouette, barely distinguishable, standing just behind the curtain. Not moving, not speaking. Just there. The image froze, distorted into digital noise, and then ended abruptly. Martin sat in silence, hands trembling. What he had just witnessed wasn't closure. It was something worse. It was proof that Lena may have been alive longer than anyone had guessed, and that someone or something was still following her. The next day, Martin rushed to the junk shop in Glendeltha, place where this nightmare had reignited. But when he arrived, it was boarded up, closed. A for sale sign hung crookedly on the door. According to the local diner owner across the street, the shop had shut down permanently the week before, and the old man who owned it, gone, moved without a word. No forwarding address. As Martin stood outside, holding the second tape, like a fragile relic, one final question began to burn in his mind. Was Lena still trying to communicate with him, or was someone else controlling the message now? To this day, Lena Carver's fate remains unsolved. No body was ever found, no arrest was made. No one knows who sent the tapes. Or how Lena, if she truly escaped, vanished again without a trace. Some believe she's still alive, living off the grid. Others think the figure behind the curtain that night wasn't human at all. As for Martin Carver, he never stopped searching. He still drives the back roads, still checks old VHS bins in thrift stores. Still waits by his front door at night, hoping for one last message. Because when your child disappears into the dark, hope is the only thing that refuses to die.
If you liked this video, don't forget to hit that like button, share it with your friends, and drop your thoughts in the comments below. Most importantly, subscribe and hit the bell icon so the next secret finds you first.